What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Fantasy Golf Bag podcast. I'm your host, Redkacheek, and this week we are going to be previewing the CJ CUP Byron Nelson at TPC Craig Ranch. So this is done on Sunday, so I'm trying to get this out a day early-ish. So the plan is just to walk through the golf course and talk through it. It's a little bit unique, good and bad for sure. But we'll talk through the golf course. There's the field is already loaded at fantasygolfbag.com, but obviously there's no DK salaries and we don't have odds posted yet. So you can go on there and start using Approach IQ and Driving IQ as soon as you watch this podcast or video. But there's no DK pricing. So we're just going to talk about the golf course, not specifically any players. Like I said, the field's loaded, but without pricing, it would be kind of just all over the place. All I can see is Bridgman looks extremely good. So if you want to place an early bet on Jacob Bridgman, that's probably where you want to go. But let's talk through TPC Craig Ranch. We're going to talk through a few tools, starting with the Course Preview Pro as always. Now I will say I just want to really quickly highlight a couple new additions this week. So the first thing we have up is this first round leader dashboard tool. So you can see this every week, same as like the Course Preview Pro or Course Preview. If you're a free member, it'll get populated with the course for that upcoming week. And it's just a really easy way to quickly query, because it's already doing it for you, the first round leaders for the last couple years, and then the actual first round lead stats for those players in the current field. So this top section here is basically the last 5 years in this case, or last 4 years in this case. Matt Wallace, Sungyeon No, Sebastian Munoz. You can see the scores they shot, a lot of 63s and a couple 60s. You can see the breakout of, birdies, bogeys, doubles. Hopefully they wouldn't have any doubles being a first round leader, but you will see that in like the US Open for sure. Then you can see the strokes gained and how that broke out for the first round leaders. So, and the tee times, that's obviously quite helpful, getting an idea of how early guys teed off. You can see all these, 4 out of 5, and Spieth tied JJ Spaun in 2021, teed off in the afternoon, but otherwise it's nothing but early tee time. So again, just trying to give you some clarity on what we have seen at this golf course. And then obviously where we'll talk about this in the Course Preview Pro as we go through this podcast. But obviously stroke gain approach is a big part of it. And then to shoot 60, you're going to have to gain a significant number of shots putting, most likely. And that's kind of what you see here. So, the different strokes gain totals, you can see how much better they were versus the field in those years. Sebastian Munoz, 60, gained 10 shots on the field. Sungyeon No gained 9, and only, last year Matt Wallace only gained 5.8 against the field in his 63. You can kind of see how that's broken out. He was pretty consistent, gained a good chunk around the green, but large in a way, approach was the biggest factor in the first round leader, at least for that round. Again, don't try not to confuse that with lead-in form or lead-in stats that we do discuss. And then obviously putting, there's no first round leaders losing strokes putting. So that's probably large in a way every week. The biggest factor in a first round lead is the guy that can, hit a ceiling with his putting, and obviously coming in with decent form on a course where approach is prevalent. Obviously that's good every week, almost every course, or if off the tees, maybe a little bit more valuable. You'll see that here. So nice, easy way to do it. And then this is the field that we have loaded right now. You can see it's difficult on a course it's only had a handful of events hosted at, but this gives you a quick look through like their average score in round 1 and their average finish in round 1. So Jake Knapp, Taylor Pendrith finished second in the first round last year, shot 64s. Peter Malnati, the year or 2022. Let's see if someone with multiple. Justin Lauer, average of 11.3, average of 65.3 scoring average over 3 events. So largely pretty good showing from Justin Lauer in round 1. A little bit all over the place for Scotty back through 2021. But just really quickly wanted to highlight that. And a pretty cool little tool. I think that was it. Oh yeah, so we cleaned up this search. So up here at the top, obviously this is where you used to be able to type in, Rory McIlroy, right? And Rory McIlroy would show up, and he's not in the field, so we don't populate players not in the current field. We'll probably get to that where you can just view all players and select anyone you want. But let's say you can search for tournaments. So if you want to go look up the CJ Cup, now you can go pull the CJ Cup at Byron Nelson, and that'll go populate the leaderboard. And I'm going to add a few more dashboards, kind of a la the Course Preview Pro breakouts. Essentially going to kind of map out the same stuff. And for every year, you'll be able to see a breakout of all those Course Preview tools dashboards, and you could go back to any year looking at what they had at that event. So cool stuff. Easy way for you to kind of go through this thing and, go look through any of these players. Scotty Scheffler, you go click his name. If you want to go look at the Masters, then you can go type in the Masters. There's Arnold Palmer Invitational, Masters Tournament 2021. So there we go. We can go click through that and go see any of the past leaderboards. Nice, easy way to find those tournaments instead of the previous way of going through DFS data, which has a lot of cool stuff. The simulations are there, projections, obviously. And that's where the tournament summaries were. But now you can just kind of search it and go right there and then navigate to any year straight from this. So quick housekeeping notes. Now we can get going. TPC Craig Ranch. All right. Last 5 winners, TPC Craig Ranch. Obviously, you guys know this is kind of easily one of the lowest scoring events, if not the lowest scoring event. Actually, we could probably go quickly see, since I don't rank it by scoring average as far as like easiest to hardest, but we can go look at scoring. Let's see, Craig Ranch, return to par, minus 2.79, the lightest. Let's see. No, Kapalua. So it's down there. Obviously, it's going to be in the top 50 of the last couple of years. I mean, if we just did 2024 as a pretty good one, you're in the top. Was that 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he's 7th last year on easiest golf courses, return to par scoring. So terrible tangent there, but obviously this golf course gives up a lot of birdies. You're going to have to go low. Everyone goes low. Is actually a pretty bunched up leaderboard, given that the winning score is only, low to mid 20s under par, which is pretty hefty. But the overall scoring average is almost, 2.3 strokes under par for those 4 events. It is a par 71, so that keeps that under par score in the mid 20s and not going to like minus 30 like you would see at Kapalua. Obviously, one of the par 5s for the members being a par 4 that would cut it down. But large and away, a lot of low scoring, a lot of birdies. Not my favorite event, and probably most people are in that boat. I mean, it's anytime there's a big putting contest and its scoring is that low, it's a bit volatile. So 23 under for Taylor Pendrith last year, Jason Day minus 23, Cage Lee minus 26, and then Cage Lee back in 21 minus 25. Like I said, par 71, 7,400 yards. So a little bit on the longer side, in my opinion. The greens we have at bent grass, 11.5 stemp, so kind of on the slower side, basically average, maybe just slightly under average for speed. Zoysia fairways, Bermuda rough, reasonable rough. We got it at 2.75 inches. That's not insignificant. Tom Weiskopf design. Average distances for each of the par types. Average par 3 is 203, kind of on the longer side. Average par 4, 446, pretty average. And then average par 5, 561, about average. And you can see all these holes play under par on average except for the par 3s. And then the hole by holes here, you can see the par 5s, are playing over a half a shot under par. And then a good handful of the par 4s playing a tenth of to 0.4 strokes under par. So very, very, just a lot of birdies all in all on this golf course. And that's why I don't particularly like it. I'd rather see, generally speaking, the more difficult a golf course is. That's why, generally speaking, outside of a handful of people over the course of history, In the majors, when scoring is single digits or lower, you think about like a US Open being even par as their target score, the best players are usually gonna prevail. It's very hard for a no name to beat any of the top guys in the world over 4 days on a difficult golf course. But on a birdie fest like this, it's really just kind of boils down to who hit it a little bit better and then who made the majority of their putts inside of 10 feet. Um, and unfortunately, that's just what we have this week. So we'll talk through a few of the statistics that we like to look at here at Fantasy Golf Bag. Average winning score, 24 under par. Average cut line, 5.5 under par. It's almost 4 strokes easier than any other PGA Tour course on average. Driving distance is up there, 296.8. If you recall from the last month or two, we've been hovering around 290. There's been a few, upper 280s. So this is definitely one of the longer driving distance courses we've seen. But of course, that's not always what it, that's not the only number we should look at anyways for driving. So we'll look at the driving distance distribution in just a second down here. Driving accuracy is up. The interesting things is, any course you go to, obviously on a birdie fest like this, it's you're not going to see it being difficult anywhere for the most part, but it is important to look at what makes it difficult or try to figure out what makes it easier than an average golf course. So with driving accuracy up, the first thing I want to look at is missed fairway penalty and distance penalty. Both of these are below tour average. Missed fairway penalty is 0.07 strokes less than tour average. It's at plus 0.29. So that means on average, every player that misses a fairway on any given hole scores about 0.29 strokes higher than any other player that hit the fairway. So just an apples to apples comparison on each hole, and that's the average for this golf course. Then the distance penalty, also below the tour average, which I thought was surprising. I honestly thought it would be a little bit, at least tour average, if not higher. But distance penalty is down 0.05. So it's sitting at plus 0.15. So basically, this is telling us if you're below any average on any hole. So let's say an average drive. We can go down to the bottom here real quick. Hole one here. Let's see. Average drive is 277. So not super long. 284 here on hole 2, 281. These are pretty short drives, to be completely honest. And if you look at the distance penalty, 0.07. So that means any player that hit it less than 277 only lost about 0.07 on average. And that includes all drives in the rough, not in the rough, the fairway. 0.16 for hole 2, 0.12 for hole 4. So this is a pretty small gap. So any of these distances where guys did not hit it to the field average on any hole or above it, obviously, are only losing a tenth of a shot. That's not much. A big long golf course, you would see that hovering around 0.3. So this is a very interesting golf course where there's really no rough penalty. It's less than tour average. And with that being a low missed fairway penalty, I would expect the distance penalty to be a little bit higher of a spread, and it's not. So that tells me that a lot of guys are trying to hit it to the same spot. There's not a lot to be gained off of a distance perspective. But we will look at the driving distance distributions here in just a second. But I did want to point that out. I thought that was interesting. Not a big penalty for missing fairways and not a big penalty for being shorter than the field average. So, where are the guys gaining strokes? Where can they have an advantage? And unfortunately, we're about to talk about it, but it's going to be around the greens and on the greens. But going through a few of the other ones, green regulation percent is up. Pretty easy from the fairway. Hitting the fairway is pretty easy from the rough. The green regulation rate is going to go up. Green regulation from the fairway, 76%. Green regulation from the rough is 51%. So all of those are above the tour average. Just very easy tee to green. Honestly, you could summarize it that way pretty efficiently. Scrambling is easier than tour average. Obviously, birdie or better is higher and bogey or worse is lower. So again, kind of a medium length spiel on this golf course being very easy. But I think it's interesting. If you're using Course Preview Pro, the purpose of it is really to kind of get down into the weeds a little bit and figure out like what makes this golf course easy for certain guys or hard for certain guys. And distance isn't a big factor. Driving accuracy isn't a big factor. Green regulation isn't a big factor. I will say proximity is the only, if you're looking at this, is the only other red one here where, 47 feet on average with the big greens, 3 putts, etc. That's probably the biggest difference maker, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But like as far as T2 green, it's not difficult. I think the proximity makes a big difference. And then obviously making those putts inside of 10 feet is a big difference maker. And we'll talk about time machine stuff here in just a second as far as lead in form, because I was a little bit disappointed. I think maybe you could spin it both ways, to be completely honest. I think maybe last year was an outlier, but maybe the years before that were an outlier. It was kind of all over the place, but we will look at the time machine in just 1 second. All right, let me take the winner out of here, especially with just four years. This is the chart of strokes gained by finish position. So like I said, you can see off the tee, it's got an even spread. Gaining a little bit more off the tee for every finish position makes sense. There's a little bit to be gained off the tee, but not a ton. Approach, there's a lot to be gained between those who made the cut and those who finished in the top 25 and top 10, but it wasn't a big difference between top 25 and top 10. So basically, the guys that did the best on approach had a big leg up against those who just made the cut. But it wasn't a big differentiator between top 10 and top 25. It had to come from somewhere else. Around the green was about the same with top 10 and top 25. And then you do see putting as a difference maker. The top 25 averaged about 2.5 strokes gain putting. The top 10 averaged about 3 strokes putting. So about 0.5 stroke difference. I will pull the winner in just to give you guys a look at that. The average winner gains about 3.7. So almost, it's over a stroke off the top 25 and almost 0.7 off of the top 10. So it is a difference maker. And then a large and away tee to green, just overall, you can see there's a big gap there. Try to quit hovering. Yeah, big difference between those who made the cut, just kind of hanging around, doing just enough to make the cut, and those that really did well, finishing in the top 25 and top 10. And to be completely honest, the top 25 metrics don't look much different than the top 10, which is something I would like to see. If I really want to be picky about it, I would say off the tee has more of an edge over those who just finished in the top 25 than any other strokes gained statistic. And that's hard to kind of capitalize on in tools and data and stuff like that. But I will say for the event itself, the guys that gained a little bit more off the tee, whether that's a little bit more accurate or a little bit more distance, that's the way they gained. They moved up the leaderboard from a top 25 to top 10 on average, basically. All right. Driving distance distribution, probably one of my favorite dashboards or charts on the Course Preview Pro. So like we just talked about, 296.8 is the average driving distance, but that doesn't mean every single hole is 296.8. We talk about that every week, and that's the entire purpose behind basically everything that we do at Fantasy Golf Bag. I mean, there's more to just one number. That's not how golf courses work, and that shouldn't be how your golf research should work. So 296.8, how is that made up? You got 270 to 290. You have 6 drives between 270 and 290. You have 6 drives between 290 and 310. Then you have 2 drives between 310 and 330. So large in a way, I would say the 290 to 310 and 310 to 330 is my predominant focus. Obviously, the longer, especially when I start to think about how am I going to use our IQ tools, the guys that hit it the best, gain the most strokes in those buckets is what I'm going to be focused on. 270 to 290 is an even split with that 290 to 310 range. But I think I'd be a little bit more concerned with who's going to gain more strokes off the tee between 290 and 310. And even though it's only 2 tee shots per round, between 310 and 330, I do want to see who's gaining the most strokes there. Probably ideally also hitting more fairways from that distance. But that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. I think I would just focus my attention on 290 to 310 and 310 to 330. I'll probably do a combo IQ sheet again since we haven't built that in to combine the driving IQ with approach IQ data, I probably do another members only video and do a combined sheet for this week. Again, it's a pretty volatile event anyway, so I wouldn't be too strict on if someone doesn't check too many boxes, I just can't play them. That's not going to be the case this week. But I think that's if I really want to be somewhat critical on the statistics leading in, I would want to see who's doing the best 290 to 310, gaining the most strokes off the tee, and then obviously 310 to 330. All right, approach distance distribution. All in all, 200 plus is like the biggest factor. I got 45+% of approach shots, 200 plus. All the rest of the buckets are a little bit less than tour average. 50 to 125 is less than half of the tour average. So again, from approach IQ standpoint, since we can rank out every bucket to a specific weighting, I would probably put, 50 to 125, just take it out, put a big bump to 200 plus, talking like 50% or 55% weighting, and then do an even split between 125 and 200 and run it from there. I think if I can get, like I said, I'm thinking through it now, I'll do a members only video and do a combo IQ sheet, just like we did a couple weeks ago. I think it would be a big benefit to know who's gaining the most strokes off the tee, specifically 290 to 310 and 310 to 330, but I'll just try to say 290 to 310 to be concise here. And then who is gaining the most strokes 200 plus. If I can get a decent handful of names that meet both of those criteria or excelling, top 25 in both of those buckets, I think that's a pretty good starting point for DFS this week, and obviously betting. And then the putting is just an additional factor. All right, past winners and lead-in stats. We just talked about the last 4 winners going pretty low, right? 23 under to 26 under par. And the lead-in stats is a little bit confusing, to be completely honest. There's we know how good Taylor Pendrith is off the tee, but he was not good leading into this event last year. And I even pulled his profile up before I started this podcast just to take a peek. And he had his best finish in basically 2 months at the Corrales Punta Cana event. He finished T11, but he had lost strokes off the tee in, I think, 4 out of 5 events leading into this event. Besides Punta Cana, which I assume he played much, much better. We just don't have strokes gained from that event. The other winners did gain strokes off the tee, which is kind of what I would expect. So like I said, the 24 data is a little bit weird with it being seemingly an outlier year for how volatile the players were. And I know with the schedule change and everything, it might have just been a weaker field, and that's just what it is. But you can see Jason Day, KH Lee, and KH Lee again were gaining strokes off the tee. That was consistent. Putting, fairly consistent with Jason Day and KH Lee in his second win. But approach, mostly negative, which is funny. Proximity was negative. They were losing to the field. Green regulation, mostly negative. There's not much to gain here. That's why I was saying, I think off the tee, even though it's not a huge benefit on length and not a huge benefit on accuracy, I do think if they're driving it well here and their long irons are good, that's the recipe for success. Again, this is just boiling it down to basic strokes gain stats and traditional stats like green regulation, proximity, birdie or better, etc. But you can see that. Hopefully you're watching this on the YouTube version or Spotify video. Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to block out the Pendrith incoming data just because we didn't see what his metrics were at Punta Cana. I think his off the tee probably improved quite a bit. It just had a bad swing in there for like 2 months, and this looks really bad. I think he probably turned it around, was closer to 0, and I would say off the tee is probably the biggest indicator of success for lead in form for winners. Now, I mentioned the time machine. Let's go take a peek at that. So like I said, 2024, it's a lot of red, and back to my original point, I just think with the way the field was set up that year, we just got a weaker field where guys just weren't gaining a lot of strokes in any category to show us much weight. I'll come back to 24 and do top 25 in just a second, but just quickly scrolling through here, there's a few guys gaining strokes off the tee, a few gaining strokes on approach, a couple gaining on around the green, but large and away, it was 0 or negative in all those different categories. When we go back to 2023, it's a little bit more of what I would expect. Off the tee, much more green. In fact, the average top 10 finisher was gaining 0.35 strokes off the tee leading into this event. Approach, more green than 2024 for sure, but still kind of all over the place. Around the green, mostly neutral. I would say you throw out Ryan Palmer, you throw out Jason Day, and everyone's right around 0. Not a big advantage. And then even the putting, doesn't really stand out. So I would just boil it down to off the tee, and approach is always important. I just think if you use approach IQ and focus on those longer distances, that's going to be a big advantage. We'll go back to 2022. A little bit more of what I would expect. Not a ton, but there's definitely some good ones. KH Lee, Jordan Spieth, Hideki, Sebastian Munoz, James Hahn, Davis Riley gaining a considerable amount off the tee. And most of those guys were gaining a good bit on approach. So that would be the profile I would expect to see do well here. And I think just 2024 was probably a strange event with guys taking off. So we'll go back to top 25. For 2024, it looks about the same. Off the tee, again, is right here. And, there's just not much big green chunks to look at. In fact, the average for the 29 players that finished in the top 25, the average off the tee incoming form, they were gaining 0 strokes off the tee and only gaining 0.05 on approach. Everything else is just kind of all over the place. So all that's to say is sometimes we're trying to really nail down the perfect model. I know model is used loosely in the terms of DFS. People are just kind of aggregating statistics. But for sake of not confusing people that might be new to DFS, when they're modeling out their rankings using statistics, like we're trying to boil it down to what are the biggest factors to profile the players that should have success. And just it doesn't kind of carry any weight this week. I still think logically off the tee and approach carries some weight, but you're going to see guys that are going to come in here with little to no form and do well. It just is what it is. So this would be a good, MME, probably not the right term, but definitely a little bit looser pool, hitting some lower owned guys with some chalkier names that check a lot of boxes, and then trying to get the ownership right. And hopefully those low owned plays, finish in the top 20. That's kind of the way I would view it. And of course, if you're a pro member at Fantasy Golf, you can go click into Time Machine and go to any of those years and kind of review top 10, top 5, top 25. And then obviously it shows the winners. But I did want to clarify that because it is confusing on weeks like this where there's not any standouts. Like the Florida Swing is fun because every event demands so much good ball striking from the players to do well. Good off the tee, both driving accuracy and distance, good approach play, good iron play into all those greens, good green regulation rate, etc. And honestly, all the Florida Swing events, I think Houston, I think San Antonio as well to a certain extent, and then obviously the Masters, all the lead-in form numbers were green across the board. We just don't see that here, unfortunately. And you can see the odds are quite a bit longer. KH Lee 178-1, 95-1, and then Pendrith last year was 90-1. So look for some longer odd players to do well and contend. I do have the field loaded here. No pricing, but we can look at who had the most top 10s. Only 2. Ryan Palmer, T5 and 22, T8 and 23, Jordan Spieth, T9 and 21, and a second and 22. And ironically, both of those guys missed the cut last year. And a bunch of guys that have one top 10. So course history, not really going to do much for me this week. And then the historical results, you can go through and look at the leaderboard. Again, you can see guys that gained a lot of strokes off the tee did pretty well on average. That's just the fact of that event. That doesn't mean that profile kind of matches up with that event. Strokes gained approach as well. Whoever gains the most strokes on approach is going to do well. That doesn't mean they were gaining the most strokes leading into that event. So again, kind of got to be creative this week. I do think the IQ tools help that. And then you can go down here and you can kind of see like the putting. 3-putt avoidance was really important for top 25, top 10 in the winter. The made putts inside of 10 feet, you can see is very high. So for the top 10, 91% made inside of 10 feet, and the winners made 93%. So they got to be making their putts. Again, 10 feet's a pretty big range, but making their 3-footers, 5-footers, and 10, obviously up to 10 feet. Outside of 10 feet was pretty negligible. There's nothing to gain there. We can look really quickly, though, when we got you. We can look at proximity. So obviously the proximity numbers were high. But what you can do, you can go through each of these buckets and kind of see which ones trend down for the winner. Ironically, the wedges trended down for the winner quite a bit. So that's interesting. And we talked about the 200 plus. It was down considerably off those who made the cut. We're talking like 3 feet each improvements for top 10, top 25 to top 10. And the winners went up, ironically. So even though 200 plus is a very important number, their proximity, again, is an average. So it takes into account the bad shots and the good shots, and just as an average, was actually higher than the top 10 finishers. So that just tells me that they made the putts when they mattered. 175 to 200 was pretty important. Yeah, all in all the ranges, I would say 150 to 175 was mediocre, and 100 to 125 was meaningless. Outside of that, all the other ones I would put a good amount of weight into. With that being said, I guess we can just kind of talk through DrivingIQ really quick. Like I said, I'll do a members only video. So if you are a member, this will get posted in the blog, and then you'll be able to download this sheet when I'm done making it in the video. So I'll walk you through the formulas and everything and how to download the DrivingIQ data that we kind of customize. Same with the approach IQ. And then we do some percentile ranks, combine it together. And that's how we will get to a combo IQ. So let that load for just a second. Let me clear this one out. And then I think that's it. Again, the simulations are up. So that's basically all I use this week for the Zurich Classic, which is a fantastic event. All right, I'll pull up Approach IQ. Oh, it's still loading. I restarted the servers a little bit ago, so they're probably still running slow before they ramp back up. Let's let that go. All right. This is ready. So let's, like we talked about, 200 to 225, pretty important. 150 to 175 showed it wasn't. So let's just take that out. And like I said, if I'm really being picky on the data that I want to use, proximity is always more valuable on the shorter distances. And as you get higher, based on how proximity is calculated, I think it has much less value. So I would use stroke gain approach. So we'll pull stroke gain approach. And then it doesn't really matter here. Obviously, I don't care about fairway bunker, and I don't want to use primary rough. Again, that's using primary rough in the last few events, and some of those are going to be higher. So let's use fairway par threes and first cut. We'll run that. And then we get this. So let's get our weighted ranking really quick for approach. Let's do a big chunk for 200, 225. Let's do do it this way. 60. We'll do 25 and 15. We'll do that for now. Yeah, that's fine. All right. So that'll give us our model ranking over here. Mac Meissner, Webb Simpson, Blades Brown. We do include the shots. So you can see Blades Brown doesn't have a ton over those events. We can back that up to last 12. And while that's pulling, we do have the DrivingIQ pulled up. I'll pull that up in just a second. So this is what that looks like now. All right. So the top guys with decent sample size. Interesting. Grayson Sigg, which actually, for not being a very long guy, actually does pretty well on longer golf courses, which I would consider this on the longer side. Nikolai Hogard, Webb Simpson, Antoine Rosner, Mac Meissner, Henrik Norlander, Kevin Yu, Michael Thorbjornsen, and Eric Van Rooyen. So that's just like looking strictly at the approach numbers, weighting 200, 225 pretty highly. So you can see a lot of them are doing very well in the top 15, we'll say, for that distance. But that would be the start. And then for DrivingIQ, I would just use 290 to 310. I don't care about fairway penalty and distance penalty. Let's do strokes gained off the tee and see who's gaining the most in those buckets. So a significant drop in sample size for Pearson Coody, but still pretty good. Again, you would bump this up against approach IQ numbers. But Pearson Coody, Scotty Scheffler, Keith Mitchell, Isaiah Salinda, Rico Hoey, Alex Smalley, and Jordan Spieth, interestingly enough. We have the driving accuracy, and it's funny, like you think Jordan Spieth's not very accurate. From 290 to 310, he's actually the 21st ranked for accuracy, relative accuracy in this field, which is quite interesting. He's had some good showings here, first round lead. So yeah, I would, like I said, I would bump this up. I would get the rankings that I would want off of here. I think strokes gained off the tee is probably the thing I would be most concerned with, because that includes driving distance and accuracy. Use approach IQ, start to figure it out. Like for example, like Pearson Coody is number one in that driving model, but he ranks really far down in the model rankings, 62.2, which is down below the field average. Decent long iron, but very poor in the mid range. So obviously you have to take all that into account. For an event like this, I would be a little bit more loose on a guy that's going to be cheap and low owned, like a Pearson Coody in Texas. Maybe take a shot on Pearson Coody. This would be a good opportunity to do that in a weaker field, gives them some advantage, and has a lot to play for. Jesper Svensson's down here, been on, Taylor Pendrith again. So it's an interesting way to look at it. And then I'll just go quickly back to the course preview pro. And I think that's it for today's podcast. So like the main takeaways again is looking at this every single week, looking at the raw numbers is totally fine. But then you actually start breaking it down by the buckets, approach and driving, and trying to get a feel for a profile of what type of players should do well here. And then you dive into all the tools, using those tools to your advantage, obviously, combining approach and driving and trying to get a perfect course fit profile is kind of like what I like to call it. All right. I think that's it, guys. I'll do the members only video with the combo IQ stuff together. I'll do that tomorrow, Monday, when the salaries get posted. But hopefully this gets you off on the right foot. Again, it's a very volatile event with the low scoring. Don't be afraid to be a little bit different. Play some guys that are going to be lower owned that show some signs of light, and have fun with it. We got a nice string of events coming up here. I'm excited for the Truist Championship at the Philadelphia Cricket Club. And then we got the PGA Championship right around the corner. So good week. A good week to have a good week. I think that's it, guys. Best of luck this week. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Redkacheek. And you can find all this data at fantasygolfbag.com. Sign up for a pro subscription, and you can dive into all of our IQ tools, the Stat Model Pro, stuff most people are familiar with. but there's a lot to dive into and peel away layers to help you out this week and for the next couple months with the big events ahead. All right, guys, best of luck. We'll see you later.